The scent of roasted rosemary and old wood filled the air, a perfume Alice had once associated with home. Now it was merely the scent of Margaret's house, a place where she had become a ghost long before she was dead. For 10 years, Alice had orbited her family's life, a satellite drifting in the cold outer edges, visible but never truly part of the constellation. The annual family reunion was the apex of this charade, a day of forced smiles and hollow pleasantries, and it always culminated in the same, quiet heartbreak. "Everyone, come on! Picture time before the light fades." Margaret's voice, sharp and commanding even at 75, cut through the low hum of conversation. A familiar knot tightened in Alice's stomach. She watched as aunts, uncles, and cousins began to assemble on the grand staircase, a place reserved for the family's visual history. Her brother Daniel was already there, his arm around his wife, his 2 children fidgeting at their feet. He caught Alice's eye for a fleeting second, a flicker of something, pity, discomfort, before turning away to smile for his mother. "Alice, darling, would you be a dear and make sure the gravy is still warm?" Margaret asked, not looking at her, her focus entirely on arranging the human props for her perfect family portrait. It was never a direct order to leave. It was always a request, a task, a gentle nudge that positioned Alice just outside the frame. For the first few years, it was, "Could you hold my purse?" or "Check on the little ones, they're getting fussy." Now it was simply an assumed part of the ritual. Alice was the keeper of things, the overseer of details, the one who made sure the real family could have their moment. She retreated to the kitchen, the sound of the photographer's cheerful instructions and the subsequent laughter feeling like stones thrown against a distant window. She didn't need to see it to know what it looked like. The same beaming faces, the same carefully constructed image of unity. A perfect lie, captured in a flash. In a drawer in her own home, she had a small, sad collection of these annual photos, acquired discreetly from other relatives. In each one, there was a space, a gap, an invisible person who should have been there. Her space. The first time it happened, she was 28. Her father had passed away a few months prior, and the family gathered for a somber Christmas. He had always been her anchor, the one who saw her, the one who would pull her into the frame with a booming laugh and say, "There's no family without my Alice." With him gone, Margaret's subtle exclusions became less subtle. As the family gathered for the photo that year, Margaret had placed a hand on Alice's arm. "Let the core family go first, dear," she had said, her voice soft but laced with steel. Alice had waited, but the call to join never came. She watched from the doorway, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest as the flashbulb went off, sealing her official erasure. Daniel had approached her later, his expression clouded. "Don't take it personally, Alice," he'd mumbled, avoiding her gaze. She's grieving. It's not about you." But it was. It was always about her. She was the reminder of a different legacy, a different bloodline. Her mother, who had died when Alice was a child, was a woman Margaret had never approved of for her free spirit and unconventional ways. Alice, with her quiet nature and artistic soul, was a living echo of a woman Margaret had spent a lifetime trying to forget. The exclusion from the photographs wasn't just an oversight. It was a deliberate act of curation. Margaret was trimming the family tree, pruning the branches she deemed unworthy. Now, standing in the kitchen, Alice ran a hand over her purse, the smooth leather cool beneath her fingers. Inside, nestled between her wallet and her keys, was a folded set of documents. Not a weapon, but a truth. The last will and testament of her father, a copy she'd had printed and stored for this very day. For 10 years, she had held her tongue, swallowed her pain, and allowed herself to be edited out of their history. She had hoped for a change, for a moment of recognition that never came. Last week, while sorting through her father's old desk, she found the original will tucked away in a hidden compartment. His words, his final wishes, were a balm to a decade-old wound, and they were a reckoning. She took a deep breath, the scent of rosemary no longer smelling of home, but of a battleground. The laughter from the hallway died down. The picture had been taken. Another year, another photo without her. But this, she vowed, would be the last. The family trickled back into the dining room, their faces flushed with the counterfeit joy of the camera flash. They moved around Alice, a river flowing around a stone, as she brought the gravy boat to the table. No one met her eye, except for a brief, sympathetic glance from Daniel's wife Sarah, which was quickly extinguished when Margaret cleared her throat. "Excellent, Alice. Right on time," Margaret said, taking her seat at the head of the long mahogany table. It was the same table where Alice's father used to sit, where he would regale them with stories of his travels, his voice a warm and comforting rumble. Now it was Margaret's throne. The meal began, a carefully orchestrated performance of clinking silverware and polite, surface-level chatter. They talked about the weather, about a cousin's recent promotion, about Daniel's son's latest soccer trophy. Every topic was safe, manicured, and utterly devoid of depth. Alice ate mechanically, the food tasteless in her mouth. The knot in her stomach had grown into a solid, unyielding core of resolve. The documents in her purse felt like a tangible weight, a physical manifestation of her father's love and her own buried voice. She waited for the lull, the moment after the main course was cleared and before the dessert was served, when the conversation naturally paused. It was the moment she had rehearsed in her mind 1,000 times. "I found something of Dad's last week," Alice said, her voice quiet but clear. It cut through the room with surgical precision. All conversation stopped. Heads turned. It was the first time she had initiated a topic of substance at one of these gatherings in a decade. Margaret's smile tightened at the edges. "Oh, what was it, dear? One of his old pipes?" she asked, a subtle dismissal in her tone. "No," Alice replied, her gaze steady on her stepmother. "It was his will." The silence that followed was heavy and immediate. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his eyes darting between Alice and his mother. "Alice! This is hardly the time or the place," Daniel began, his voice a low warning. "I think it's the perfect time and place," Alice interrupted, a feat of courage she didn't know she possessed. She reached into her purse, her hand steady, and pulled out the folded documents. She placed them on the table in front of her empty plate. The crisp white paper stood out like a surrender flag, or a declaration of war. He had a hidden compartment in his desk. I'd never seen it before. "It seems this is his final will and testament, not the one you presented." Margaret let out a short, sharp laugh, but there was no humor in it. It was the sound of cracking ice. "Don't be ridiculous, Alice. The will was read and executed years ago. Everything was left to me, to care for the family. You know this." "I know what I was told," Alice said, her voice gaining strength. "But that's not what this says. Dad's actual will. It's a little different. For one thing, he left me the house." A collective gasp went through the room. All eyes swiveled from Alice to Margaret, whose face had become a mask of cold fury. Her knuckles were white where she gripped the tablecloth. "He wanted me to have it," Alice continued, her voice now ringing with the conviction of her father's words. "He wrote, so that my Alice will always have a home, a place where she is the center of the picture, never outside the frame. He also specified that the family portraits, the ones he loved so much, should continue, and he made a special point of saying he wanted me, as he put it, front and center, right where she belongs." She looked directly at Daniel, whose face had gone pale. "He left you his classic car collection and a significant part of his investment portfolio, Daniel. But the house, the heart of the family, he left it to me." Margaret slammed her hand on the table, the silverware jumping with a clatter. "This is an outrage, a forgery. You dare to come into my home, a home I have maintained for this family, and tell these lies?" "It's not a lie," Alice said, pushing the documents across the table towards her brother. "It's all here, dated and signed a month before he passed, witnessed by his lawyer. You can see for yourself." Daniel stared at the papers as if they were a venomous snake, his face a battleground of confusion, loyalty, and a dawning terrible understanding. The perfect family picture was finally, irrevocably, starting to shatter. The silence in the dining room stretched, thin and fragile. Every eye was on Daniel, who sat frozen, his gaze fixed on the documents lying between him and his sister. The weight of 10 years of deception, of unspoken truths and carefully constructed facades, seemed to land squarely on his shoulders. He was the bridge between the two opposing forces at the table, the mother who had raised him, and the sister who had been systematically erased. Slowly, as if moving through water, Daniel reached out and drew the papers toward him. His hands, usually so steady, trembled slightly. As he read, the color drained from his face, leaving behind a pallor that was almost gray. He read the legal jargon, the familiar looping signature of his father, but it was the handwritten notes in the margins that seemed to strike him the most. He mouthed the words Alice had already spoken. "Front and center, right where she belongs." This is Dad's handwriting," he whispered, the words barely audible. He looked up, not at Alice, but at his mother. The question in his eyes was a raw, open wound. "Mother? What is this?" Margaret stood up, her chair scraping harshly against the wooden floor. Her composure, the regal and impenetrable armor she wore, was gone. In its place was a raw, desperate fury. "It's a trick," she hissed, her voice venomous. "She's always been jealous. She was a difficult child, just like her mother. Your father was a sentimental man. He was unwell in his final months. She must have preyed on him, manipulated him into signing this nonsense." "He wasn't unwell, Margaret," Alice said, her voice calm but cold as steel. She didn't raise it. She didn't need to. The quiet certainty of her words held more power than Margaret's shrill accusations. "He was perfectly lucid, and he was sad. He told me he was worried you were pushing me away. He said he saw it happening. He just didn't know how to stop it without causing a war. It seems he decided to fight the final battle for me after he was gone." Alice looked back at her brother. "Read the last page, Daniel, the personal letter to us." Daniel's hands fumbled as he turned to the final page. It wasn't a legal document, but a letter, written in their father's familiar scrawl. Daniel began to read aloud, his voice cracking with emotion. "My dearest Daniel and Alice," he began. "If you are reading this, it means I have gone on my next great adventure. And it means that my deepest fears have come to pass, and a great injustice has been done. Alice, my love, I am so sorry. I see the pain in your eyes, the slow and cruel separation. It is my greatest failure that I could not mend the rift between your stepmother and you. So, I leave you the house, the heart of our family, as a testament to your rightful place within it. It is your anchor, your port in any storm. I trust you will fill it with love and art and laughter, just as your mother would have done." Tears were now openly streaming down Daniel's face. He continued, his voice thick with unshed grief. "Daniel, my son, you have a good heart but a quiet one. You follow the path of least resistance. I pray you have not followed it into this injustice. Your mother is a strong woman, but her strength can be a fire that burns those who get too close. I charge you to stand by your sister. Protect her. Uphold this will. It is my final wish, the most important thing I can ask of you. Be the man I know you can be. Your legacy is not in the cars or the money. It is in your integrity. Do not let me down." The letter ended. The only sound was Daniel's ragged breathing. He slowly lowered the papers and looked at his mother. The look was not one of anger, but of profound, shattering disappointment. It was the look of a man seeing the hero of his childhood as a flawed, cruel human being for the very first time. "You knew," Daniel said, his voice a hollow echo of its former self. "You had this. You had this letter, and you hid it. You lied. To me. To everyone." "I did it for this family," Margaret shrieked, her voice cracking. "To keep us together. That girl would have sold the house, squandered the legacy. I protected what your father built." "No," Daniel said, shaking his head, a single tear tracing a path through his stunned expression. "You tore it apart. You just did it so quietly we didn't hear it happening." He stood up, the will still clutched in his hand, and walked over to Alice's side. He placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of solidarity that was 10 years overdue. The family portrait was finally complete, but it was nothing like the one Margaret had tried to paint. It was a tableau of wreckage and revelation, of a brother and sister reunited in the ruins of a lie. The other family members watched, stunned and silent, their allegiances visibly shifting, the ground beneath them irrevocably changed. The spell was broken. The carefully constructed world of Margaret's design, held together for a decade by sheer force of will, shattered into a million pieces. The relatives, once a unified chorus of polite agreement, now looked like a room full of strangers. Some stared at their plates, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. Others exchanged hushed, frantic whispers. An aunt, Margaret's own sister, slowly shook her head, a look of profound disillusionment on her face. It was Sarah, Daniel's wife, who made the first move. She rose from her seat and walked to the head of the table where Margaret stood, isolated and trembling with rage. "I think we should go, Mother," Sarah said, her voice soft but firm. It was the tone one uses on an unruly child, not the matriarch of a family. Margaret flinched as if struck. She looked at her daughter-in-law, then at her son standing beside Alice, and finally her gaze swept across the room, searching for an ally, a friendly face. She found none. She had ruled by fear, not love, and in her moment of defeat, she stood utterly alone. With a strangled sob that was more fury than grief, Margaret turned and strode from the room. She didn't look back. The front door opened and slammed shut with a finality that echoed through the house, a sound far more definitive than the click of any camera shutter. The ghost was gone, but it wasn't Alice. The tension in the room didn't disappear, but it transformed. It became thick with awkwardness and regret. One by one, the other families began to make their excuses. "It's getting late," one uncle mumbled, helping his wife with her coat. "We should be going." They offered strained, apologetic smiles to Alice and Daniel as they filed out, leaving a trail of half-eaten dessert and shattered illusions in their wake. Soon, only Alice and Daniel were left in the cavernous dining room, the remnants of the feast spread between them like the debris of a shipwreck. The silence that fell was different now. It wasn't empty. It was filled with the weight of unspoken words, of a decade of lost time. "Alice," Daniel began, his voice thick. He finally turned to face her fully, his eyes red-rimmed and filled with a pain that mirrored her own. I am so sorry." It was the apology she had longed to hear for 10 years, yet hearing it now, it felt both monumental and inadequate. How could 2 words possibly encompass the depth of the hurt? "I'm sorry I wasn't stronger," he continued, his voice breaking. "I saw what she was doing. I told myself it wasn't my place. I told myself you were fine, that you were strong enough to handle it. I chose the path of least resistance, just like Dad said. It was cowardice. I was a coward." He sank into a nearby chair, burying his face in his hands. "Can you ever forgive me?" Alice looked at her brother, this man who was both a stranger and the keeper of her childhood memories. She saw the little boy who had taught her to ride a bike, the teenager who had covered for her when she sneaked out, and she saw the man who had stood by and watched her heart break, year after year. The anger she had held onto for so long was a shield, and she wasn't sure she was ready to put it down. "I don't know," she said, the honesty of it surprising even herself. "I want to. I really do. But for 10 years, I felt like I was drowning, and you were standing on the shore, watching. You didn't push me in, but you didn't throw me a rope either." She walked over to him and sat in the chair beside him, leaving a small but significant space between them. "When Dad died," she said, her voice softening, "I lost my anchor. I thought my brother would be my lifeline, but you let her pull me out to sea. This," she gestured to the will still on the table, "this isn't just about a house, Daniel. It's about the fact that Dad saw I was drowning. He saw it from wherever he is, and he was the one who threw me the rope, not you." The words landed with the force of a physical blow. Daniel flinched but didn't look away. He absorbed them, accepted them as his due. "You're right," he whispered. "You are right. I can't change what I did, or what I didn't do, but I can start now. I'm here now, Alice. I won't leave your side again, I promise." Alice looked around the room, at the grand mahogany table, the portraits of ancestors on the wall. It was her house now, a home she had won back, but one that was filled with the ghosts of lonely years. It wasn't a prize she could celebrate alone. "I don't want the house without my brother," she said quietly, closing the small gap between their chairs. "I just want my brother back." Daniel looked up, hope flickering in his tear-filled eyes. He reached across the space, not with the easy familiarity of their youth, but with the hesitation of someone trying to rebuild a fragile bridge. Alice met him halfway, and for the first time in a decade, they held hands. The grip was tentative at first, then it tightened, a silent acknowledgement of the ruins around them, and the first, small step toward building something new, together. The days that followed were a quiet storm of legal formalities and emotional excavation. The will was authentic, a fact Margaret's own lawyer, a man deeply embarrassed by his unwitting role in the deception, confirmed with a single somber phone call to Daniel. Margaret, true to her character, did not go quietly into the night. She threatened lawsuits. She made furious, rambling calls to the few relatives who would still answer, accusing Alice of elder abuse, of theft, of being a poisonous influence. But her threats were hollow, the desperate flailing of a queen deposed. No one had been manipulated except the family she claimed to be protecting. The house was legally and now morally Alice's. Daniel was true to his word. He became a constant, steady presence. He helped Alice navigate the legal transfer, his MBA and confident demeanor a stark contrast to her artistic sensibilities. He sat with her for hours, poring over the fine print, his pen scratching notes, his brow furrowed in concentration. For the first time, he was using his strengths not to maintain a flawed peace, but to secure a just one. One rainy Saturday, after the last of the legal documents had been signed, they found themselves back in the grand house. It was quiet, stripped of the pretense of the reunion. It was just a house, waiting for a home to be built inside it. They started in the attic, a space Alice hadn't been in since she was a girl. Dust motes danced in the single beam of light from a grimy window, illuminating forgotten treasures and ghosts of the past. They found boxes of their father's things, not the curated items Margaret had kept, but the things he had truly loved. Old jazz records, stacks of National Geographic magazines, and a box of slides from his travels. They found a dusty projector, and on a whim, set it up, pointing it at a bare wall. Click. An image of a young Alice, no older than 7, sitting on her father's shoulders, her face split by a gap-toothed grin. Click. A teenage Daniel, looking impossibly awkward in a rented tuxedo, his father beaming beside him. Click. A picture of their mother. She was laughing, her head thrown back, her unconventional spirit captured in a cascade of dark hair and a joyful, uninhibited smile. Alice stared, mesmerized. She had so few images of her. She was beautiful, Daniel said softly, breaking the silence. Dad loved her so much. I think Mother was always competing with a ghost. And she made me a ghost in return, Alice replied, a sad understanding dawning. It wasn't an excuse for Margaret's cruelty, but it was a reason, a piece of the puzzle that made the picture, for the first time, complete. They spent the afternoon like that, resurrecting their shared history, one slide at a time. They laughed at bad haircuts. They grew quiet at the images of their father looking young and vibrant, and they began slowly to fill in the 10-year gap between them with stories of their separate lives. Alice told him about her art, the small successes, the lonely struggles. Daniel told her about the pressures of his job, his worries about his children, the quiet, gnawing feeling that something was always missing from his life. I was so focused on being the good son, on keeping the peace, he confessed, his silhouette stark against the bright image on the wall. I never stopped to ask if the peace was worth the price. The price was you, Alice. I am so sorry. This time, when he said the words, Alice felt the shield in her heart finally lower. She reached out and squeezed his hand. I know, she said. And in that moment, she did. A few weeks later, the house began to transform. Alice, with Daniel and Sarah's help, started to reclaim the space. They moved Margaret's stiff, formal furniture into storage. Alice's vibrant paintings now hung on the walls, breathing color and life into the staid rooms. The scent of roasted rosemary was replaced by the smell of turpentine and fresh paint, and the sounds of clinking silverware were replaced by the warm static of their father's old jazz records. Daniel brought his children over, not for a formal family gathering, but just to be. They ran through the halls, their laughter echoing where strained silence had once reigned. Alice found herself teaching her niece how to mix colors, her small, paint-smeared fingers a joyful mess. She saw her nephew sitting with Daniel, looking at the old slides, asking about the grandfather he barely knew. One evening, as the sun set, casting a golden glow through the large windows of the living room, Alice was sketching in a notebook. Daniel was on the floor with his son, trying to assemble a complicated Lego creation. Sarah was reading on the sofa, a contented smile on her face. It was domestic. It was simple. It was real. Daniel looked up from the Lego instructions, a look of mock frustration on his face. Dad would have figured this out in 5 seconds, he said with a laugh. Alice smiled and looked around the room at the scene. This was it. This was the family portrait her father had wanted. It wasn't posed. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't arranged on a grand staircase for a photographer. It was messy and chaotic and beautiful. It was a living, breathing picture, and this time, she was right in the center of it. Not by decree, but by love. The house was finally a home again. Not because a will had declared it so, but because its heart had been restored. The frame was no longer a boundary, it was an embrace. And Alice was, at long last, home.